Remember when grabbing a burger was a cheap and easy meal? Well, things have changed. Nearly 80% of Americans now think fast food is too expensive. This shift is causing major problems for chains like McDonald's, which has raised prices by over 20% in just 5 years. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, this price hike isn't just affecting McDonald's, it's sort of like a domino effect across the entire fast food industry. And it's not just about inflation or supply chain issues, there's this whole complex web of factors at play that's reshaping the fast food landscape as we know it. We're going to look at 10 fast food chains that might not make it through 2024. Some of these might surprise you, and you'll want to know if your favorite spots are on the chopping block. It's like, you might need to start saying goodbye to some of those go-to places you've been hitting up for years.
Americans are still feeling the pinch when it comes to food, especially when dining out.
Consumers are getting a little salty about those fast food meals.
Since when is drive-through like a minimum of $30 for 2 people to eat?
New inflation data this week confirms that prices at fast food restaurants are on the rise, and consumers, well, they've taken note.
All right, let's talk about some of the big names in fast food that are really struggling right now. You know McDonald's, right? The place that's been around forever, always reliable for a cheap meal? Well, they're having a hard time keeping their lower income customers. People who make $45,000 or less are choosing to eat at home instead of grabbing a Big Mac. That's a pretty big deal when you think about it. McDonald's has always been the go-to for affordable meals, so if they're losing that crowd, something's definitely up. But it's not just McDonald's. You know Red Lobster? That place you might go for a fancier dinner, maybe for a birthday or something? They've actually filed for bankruptcy. Yeah, it's pretty shocking. They've got over $1 billion in debt and less than $30 million in cash. That's like having $100 in your bank account but owing 10 grand on your credit card. Not a great situation. They've already closed about 15% of their locations as part of their restructuring efforts. Red Lobster's CEO, Jonathan Tybus, explained that they're dealing with a bunch of issues. Food costs are going up, labor costs are increasing, and they're losing money on operations. Plus, it seems like people's tastes are changing, and Red Lobster hasn't really kept up. It's like they're stuck serving the same old stuff while everyone's moving on to different kinds of food. Now, here's where it gets really wild. You remember Boston Market? They used to be everywhere, right? Well, they've gone from having 300 locations to just 27. That's not a typo. They really lost 273 locations. It's like if your neighborhood suddenly went from having 10 convenience stores to having just one. The reasons behind this massive drop are pretty messy. They've got evictions, lawsuits, and a ton of unpaid bills. In fact, they're being sued by US Foods for $15 million because they haven't paid their bills. On top of that, the US Department of Labor is investigating them for wage violations. It's like everything that could go wrong for them did go wrong. So, what's the common thread here? Why are these big chains that have been around forever suddenly struggling so much? Well, it's kind of like a perfect storm of problems. First, you've got rising costs. Everything from ingredients to rent to wages is getting more expensive. Then there's inflation, which is making everyone, including these big companies, feel the pinch. And finally, people's preferences are changing. The stuff that used to be popular just isn't cutting it anymore. It's not just one thing hitting these chains, it's like they're getting punched from all sides. And the thing is, this isn't just affecting a few isolated places. This is a trend that's reshaping the entire fast food landscape. The chains that can't keep up with these changes are the ones that are going to disappear. You know, understanding all these factors can actually help you spot which chains near you might be next to go under. If you see a place that's always empty, or if the prices keep going up, but the quality stays the same, or if they're not updating their menu to keep up with new trends, those might be signs that they're struggling. It's kind of wild to think about, right? These huge chains that have been around for decades, that we all grew up with, they might not be here in a few years. It's like watching the end of an era. But at the same time, it's also a sign of how things are changing. People want different things from their food now. They're more conscious about what they're eating, where it comes from, and how much it costs. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but what about my daily coffee fix? Surely Starbucks is doing fine, right? Well, not so fast. Even the coffee giant that seems to have a store on every corner isn't immune to these problems we're seeing in the fast food industry. Let's talk about Starbucks for a second. You know, that place where a lot of us rely on for our daily caffeine hit. Well, they've hit a bit of a rough patch recently. In early 2024, Starbucks reported a 3% decline in US store sales. Now, 3% might not sound like a big deal, but for a chain as massive as Starbucks, it's actually pretty significant. To put this in perspective, in the same quarter the previous year, they saw a 12% growth. So we're not just talking about slowing down, we're talking about actually going backwards. That's a pretty dramatic shift, and it's got a lot of people wondering what's going on. Starbucks CEO Laxman Narasimhan didn't mince words about it. He said, "Our performance during the first quarter of 2024 was quite disappointing." When the CEO of a company that big is using words like disappointing, you know something's up. So what's causing this decline? Well, it's a mix of things. The economy's been pretty volatile, which is changing how people spend their money. Consumer habits are shifting too. Maybe people are brewing more coffee at home or trying out those local indie coffee shops instead. And then there's the weather. Apparently, severe weather in some areas has been keeping people from making their Starbucks runs. Now, here's where it gets real for a lot of us. This decline in sales isn't just a problem for Starbucks' bottom line, it's starting to affect which stores stay open. We're seeing long-standing locations shutting down. There was this Starbucks in New York City, been there for 30 years, and it just closed up shop because the rent got too high. So that Starbucks you've been going to for years, the one where the baristas know your order before you even open your mouth, yeah, it might not be there much longer. And if it does stick around, you might see some changes. Prices could go up as they try to make up for lost revenue, or they might cut back on hours or staff to save money. What does this mean for you? Well, if you're someone who budgets for their daily latte, you might need to start factoring in some changes. Maybe you'll have to travel a bit further to get to a Starbucks that's still open. Or you might need to budget for higher prices if your local store decides to bump up the cost of your favorite drink. But here's the thing, understanding these trends isn't just about knowing whether you'll still be able to get your favorite coffee. It's about being able to anticipate changes in your local food scene and adjust your habits accordingly. Maybe this is a push to explore some local coffee shops in your area, or it could be an opportunity to invest in a good home coffee setup. Who knows, you might even discover you prefer your own brews to what you've been buying every day. The bigger picture here is that the fast food landscape, including coffee chains, is changing rapidly. What we're seeing with Starbucks is just one part of a larger shift in how we consume food and drinks outside the home. You know, we've talked about fast food and coffee shops, but the struggles in the food industry don't stop there. The casual dining scene is getting hit hard too. You might think these sit-down restaurants would be doing better, but they're facing their own set of challenges. Let's look at some of the big names in casual dining. Applebee's, you know, that place where you might grab dinner with friends or family, they're planning to close between 25 and 35 locations in 2024. That's a pretty significant number when you think about it. And they're not alone. Denny's, the spot you might hit up for late night pancakes, they're shutting down 10 to 20 of their restaurants. But here's where it gets really interesting. TGI Fridays is closing 36 of what they're calling underperforming locations. Now you might be wondering, what does underperforming actually mean? Well, let's break it down using Denny's as an example. The CFO of Denny's recently said that for a location to break even now, it needs to make $1.2 million in sales. That's up from $1 million, and the increase is mainly due to inflation. So when we're talking about underperforming locations, we're talking about places that aren't hitting that 1.2 million mark. To put that in perspective, that's a lot of grand slams, like a whole lot. It's not just about selling a few more meals here and there. We're talking about a significant increase in sales just to keep the lights on and the doors open. But here's the thing, this isn't just a blip on the radar. It's not like these chains are having one bad year and they'll bounce back next season. This is part of a much larger, long-term trend we're seeing in the industry. Take Applebee's for example. Since 2017, they've shut down over 300 locations. That's a massive decrease in their footprint across the country. And it's not just about closing underperforming locations. These chains are struggling with declining sales, even in the stores that are still open. Applebee's has seen their same-store sales drop for 3 quarters in a row. In the last quarter of 2023, they were down 0.5%. Now, 0.5% might not sound like much, but when you're talking about a chain as big as Applebee's, that's a significant amount of money. So what's causing all this? Well, it's a combination of factors. First off, we've got rising costs across the board. Food costs are going up, labor costs are increasing, and rent isn't getting any cheaper. Then there's inflation, which is making everything more expensive and causing customers to think twice about eating out. But it's not just about money. Consumer preferences are changing too. People are looking for different dining experiences. Maybe they're opting for fast casual places instead of sit-down restaurants. Or they're choosing to cook at home more often. Whatever the reason, it's clear that the traditional casual dining model is struggling to keep up. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what does this mean for me? Well, it's pretty simple. The landscape of dining options in your area is likely to change in the near future. That Applebee's or TGI Fridays you've been going to for years, it might not be there much longer. Or if it is, you might see some changes. Prices could go up as they try to hit that break-even point. Menus might change as they try to attract new customers or cut costs, but it's not all doom and gloom. Some chains are trying to adapt. Denny's, for example, is planning to open about 30 new restaurants in 2024. They're not just closing locations, they're also trying to expand in areas where they think they can be successful. It's like they're playing a big game of restaurant chess, moving pieces around to try and stay in the game. So, here's the thing about all this fast food chaos. You're actually part of it. Every time you decide where to grab a bite, you're shaping the future of these chains. It's like your choices are votes in this big food industry election. And it's not just about where you eat, but how much you're willing to shell out. Next time you're picking a spot for a quick meal, think about this. Are you going for what's convenient, what's cheap, or what's actually good? Because those decisions, multiplied by millions of people, That's what's going to determine which chains make it and which ones vanish. Speaking of big changes, if you're interested in how other parts of our lives are shifting, check out our recent video on why modern education is kind of falling short. And hit subscribe if you want to stay in the loop on stuff like this.